going to talk about cell junctions. Cell junctions allow for either communication between the cell or just helping connect the cells or keep them connected in a multicellular organism as opposed to, just flying apart. So in plant cells, we first want to talk about the cell membrane. Animal cells too, actually, both plant and animal have this. So plant and animal cells have the cell membrane, like we were talking about before, made up of the phospholipid bilayer. But this bilayer may also have other things like proteins, or proteins that have carbohydrates or other proteins attached to them on both sides of the membrane. Now you might recall that the cell membrane, being the phospholipid bilayer, would have a hydrophobic layer in the middle. That means that the proteins that are dissolved in here or held in this part has to be nonpolar. So that's how they stay basically in place, because the nonpolar goes with the nonpolar parts, or that is not charged, goes with the hydrophobic region. And then the outside part, which is hydrophilic, that would be the part of the protein that actually has either polar or charges to it, and may have other things attached to it. Now these proteins are going to act as ports of entry for the cell. That way it can regulate things. It can also act as cell communicators, or it might be indicating that a cell is a certain type. For example, an antigen might be attached to the outside, which is telling your body that is your cell, or antigen of another cell is something that your body might attack. So anyway, those are things that could be attached here. Other things that would be dissolved in this hydrophobic region, remember, anything that is nonpolar, that would be other molecules such as steroids that could be dissolved in this part of the cell membrane. So the cell membrane is the basic way that the cell is going to get things in and out of it, and for an animal cell, it's the only way. For a plant cell, it will have a cell wall on the outside of it. So here's a drawing of a plant cell. Okay, so in the plant cell, let's just talk about that a little bit. So I'll just back up a tad. In the plant cell, we have the cell wall up here. On the outside, the cell wall is made of cellulose. Cellulose has many strands that are cross-hatching each other, so they like go one direction and then the other direction. And because of that, it has many holes between those strands that big materials can get through. So like, it's not like it's an impermeable layer, but it is a very strong layer. And a wall is laid down by a plant cell immediately on cell division, or right after cell division. And that is called the primary cell wall. Now, if a plant cell lives a long time, and or if it's going to be part of the tissue that is actually structural, which is usually dead, it will add a secondary cell wall before it dies, and that will be part of the structure. Then the cell membrane is on the inside of that. The cell membrane, like we were just talking about, that phospholipid bilayer. So this is the part that is regulating actually getting in and out of the cell, whereas the cell wall is more protective. All right, now in that, in terms of cell junctures though, there is a cytoplasmic connection between plant cells. Now this is actually this membrane of one cell actually is continuous with the membrane of the next cell, so that the things in the cytoplasm can actually flow from this cell through that gap junction, it's called a plasmodesmata, through the plasmodesmata into the neighboring cells. So this way, plant cells, things that they make in one cell can actually be shared with the neighboring cells. Say, for example, a hormone or a signal of some sort can go from cell to cell. Water could easily go. This is cytoplasmic connection. That means it's for cell communication. So this is a big deal for plant cells. In between this plant cells is something that is like kind of a goopy substance. I always think of these as like brick walls, and this is like the mortar between the two bricks. But it's a very jelly, literally jelly-like substance. It's made of pectin. If you've ever made jelly, you know jelly, you use fruit and put pectin in it to make it kind of harden up and get gooky like jelly. So pectin is a polysaccharide. So this polysaccharide is found between the cells. This allows, this stuff is going to squish in between remember I was just talking about the cell wall has many holes in it. So when I squish this jelly in between the two cell walls, what's going to happen is that jelly will push and be continuous with the cell membrane of this cell and the cell membrane of that cell, because it's pushing in the holes. And that allows then a somewhat watery connection between this cell membrane. So if I was coming from this cell but out of the membrane, I would go into the gooky part of the middle lamella that's squished between the holes of the cell wall into the next neighboring cell membrane. All right, so I would basically have a fluid connection between the two cells. So that's kind of important in terms of passage of materials. Okay, so that's a plant cell. An animal cell also has junctures. It has different types of junctures. Remember that animals, especially in the multicellular organisms, are motile. That means they move. And because of that, they have to have things that are really holding the cells together, because they're not built like brick walls. Instead, they're a bunch of cells stacked on top of each other. And if you don't want them coming apart, you have to have places to hold them together. So two things that actually hold them together are tight junctions, which are basically kind of like little rivets, like the things in the top of your jeans, those little metal pieces. They are just like holding things and various parts around the membrane to membrane, holding them, keeping them from falling apart. Another type is called a desmosome. These have many protein fibers that are going inside one cell and then in a kind of a small space, and then fanning out inside the other cell. This also helps hold things together. It's very, very strong, and it would be at points where things are likely to tear apart. And the animal cell's version of plasmodesmata is called a gap junction. A gap junction is a cytoplasmic connection, and it's important for cell communication. Again, things that are in the cytoplasm of this cell can pass directly through a gap junction into the neighboring cell, and that's very important. The other thing that kind of synonymous with the pectin of the plant cell is this, what they call the extracellular matrix, ECM, extracellular matrix. It's also got another name called the glycocalyx. And this is because it's made of glycogen, which I don't know if you remember, but that is a plant starch. I'm sorry, animal starch, not a plant starch, an animal starch, and protein fibers that are extending from the proteins that are found in the membrane. And they would extend out and anastomose. That means like wrapped together, kind of like Velcro. And this also, in addition to being a watery or fluid material between the cells, again, membrane, fluid, membrane, like we were talking about previously, but it also allows the cells a little bit more juncture. So this is another thing that kind of holds them together. So just some pictures, or just to go over the overheads of these. This is a depiction of the cell membrane, showing you some of the proteins and maybe some of the things that might be attached to that. This would all be part of that extracellular matrix. Okay, this one is showing you the gap junctions. So these are all in your textbook. I'm just showing you so you can kind of look at them maybe a little bit more closely. And this is showing you what they look like in reality. They're kind of hard to see, all right, in terms of under the microscope. And these are the depiction of all the things that we were talking about. Desmosomes, tight junctions, and gap junctions, showing the cytoplasm flowing from one place to the other. They're just not showing you the other cell right here. By the way, these are all electron micrographs made with the electron microscope. So that's how you can see something really small.